Hello guys, this is MrCamsaki, and today we will be watching a time-lapse of me building a bridge winter scene in Roblox Studio. This is not a full tutorial, rather a demonstration of a possible workflow for a one-day project. As you can see, I've posed a character on a bridge overlooking a frozen lake. A link to the concept image I used for the bridge can be found in the description. Now let us begin. First up, I'm opening a fresh baseplate, ready to insert a new brick and add color and material. And I need to say that I don't usually stick strictly to the concept. It's just a way to kind of get started and get an idea of what I'm doing. And sometimes I just build out of my head, and the concept is an idea in my head. So I like to have the grid settings up on the top left there, where my toolbars are, and that makes it really easy just to switch between one stud, 1/5, and free grid. And here I'm just testing out the transform tool, which I don't use that often. It's not really very helpful for me, and I like to just have the handles isolated with their different separate functions. So I like to have a scaling dummy in the scene, just to reference how big it actually is. But I didn't like the one I was making, so I decided to just insert my character, which looks a lot better. Now this project took me about 2.5 hours to make. And I like to give myself time limits for projects because if I don't, I'll usually get stuck on some little minor details and never end up finishing things. So I spell out a clear goal of what I'm going to create, and then I have to keep moving and keep placing new objects. That way I'm always moving forward and not getting lost on little things. You always have to start somewhere and just start constructing things from scratch. So after I've sort of placed the pillars where they go, I have to create the arches, and I do this by spinning some blocks, like that, and then I stick them right there between the pillars. Now there's a problem where when you have a bunch of rotated objects grouped, the bounding box gets really disoriented and you can't move or scale them equilaterally with the normal axes, so I like to stick another object into the selection, and then that evens things out. And here I'm just making sure that the arch does not protrude through the wall of the bridge. I like to make sure things look pretty good before I copy them. And then I just create a little edge to mask the border of the arch. And now I'm offsetting every other brick to avoid texture fighting. And that's when surfaces sort of glitch with two different textures. Time to copy. And once I place all of these, I will have my first main asset completed. Next up is the curve. And this is where this spinning method becomes useful on so many levels. After trying a method that didn't really work, I just decided to make a simple ring. I like to use the spin method for anything cylindrical that's a bit larger scale. The default cylinder works for small things, but because it doesn't really have enough polygons on it, once it gets really big, you can kind of see the lack of faces on the side. I love it when I sort of estimate values and it ends up right where I need it. On this one I still had to do a bit of adjusting. And here I'm doing the offset method again, just checking to make sure I have all the parts selected. You just tweak the values until it's seamless. And just the slightest position tweak will make sure that there's no texture fighting. Now that the ring is ready, I'll set aside an extra, and time to cut the chaff. Now I have just a little bit of adjusting to do before I move to the next side. Copy this, it doesn't fit on the other side properly. It's quite common to run into unforeseen problems during your project. I simply solve this by group scaling all of the parts to match the curve that I want. Then I restore their previous dimensions in the Properties panel. And then I just match it up like the other side. Of course, I would have had to calculate this a little more carefully to get a perfect 90-degree angle, but that wasn't what I was after. Now it's time to duplicate the main part of the bridge and match it up with the end of the curve. Now, a bit of a disclaimer here, something you don't see me doing in this video is naming all of my models and parts for organization's sake. I usually do that, just for some reason it blew past me this time. I do plan to come out with more detailed tutorials talking about all of that. This is where things start to look pretty put together, but we still have a long way to go. Filling the gap between these two bridges was a pretty simple task, but as you'll see a little bit later, it gets a little more complicated for me. Once I fit everything in there, it's pretty simple to just pull out the parts it's colliding with and reshape them to create a union. Solid modeling comes in real handy for stuff like this. After making sure all the unwanted parts are covered up, I negate the parts, create a union, and voila! A perfect fitting piece. And more toolbar customization because this is a new installation on a new device, which is why I'm even able to record these videos now. Now, I ran into a problem after saving, and that is that the union I made to fill the gap in the bridge turned invisible. No problem, a quick undo fixed that. But as I feared, that struggle was not over. Now just adding a pillar to the center of the longer curved bit. Nice and even. And now it's time for player testing. This involves just running around, and I noticed a problem right away. I needed to put arches onto the curved walls. And here I encountered something I had not dealt with previously, and that is I hadn't quite planned out how I was going to curve the arches with the curved wall. At this point in the project, I admit I felt a little like giving up. But every time I press through and just figure out how to solve the problem, I actually figure out something really cool that I can use in other projects. After thinking for a minute, I figured out a pretty simple solution. It just took a little bit of time and some very tedious tweaking. And of course, it was going to be nowhere near perfect. But this being a short one-day project, I wasn't really concerned about that. Come to think of it, maybe I should have just duplicated the blocks above and made that into an arch. Now, one of the fundamental problems here was that the distance between the pillars on the curved bit are much shorter than the distance between the pillars on the straight bit, and that means that the arch is either going to be a lot steeper, or the ends of the arch are not going to go as far down on the wall. Of course, I mean pillar. This was probably the most boring and frustrating part of the entire project. Yet it was also very satisfying once I got it to look alright. I always try to do something new and stretch myself a little bit with each project, that way I'm not just progressing linearly. And here you can see what I mean about how far down along the pillars the end of the arches go. I was trying to juxtapose the end point of the straight arches and the curved arches, but that just wasn't going to match up properly. I guess that's alright, since I try to make my architecture look structurally sound, but it doesn't really have to be because it's just a 3D model in a game and it's not like it's going to come crashing down. Unless you add some physics for that, which I don't think the Roblox engine could even simulate. This is the point where it started getting really complicated. And I think there's a difference between stretching yourself and just being inefficient. But after spending a whole bunch of time aligning these blocks, I ended up actually just deleting that arch and bringing back the other one from the other curved bit that I already did. And I think that's a flaw I still have to work out. The fact that I still keep on going on these sort of destructive tangents, wasting time on just things that are not going to work out. But in my defense, at least I didn't give up, which I seriously was considering just quitting the entire project and starting on one of the other two concept images I actually picked out of that just to see what I would create for this video. And here you can see me, like I said, copying the other pillar, and I still ended up having to do a little bit of adjusting to make it fit. And don't worry, the boring part of the video is almost over. Soon I'll be making the bridge a lot longer, kind of like a road, and just adding a simple environment around it to make a scene. What worked for the other two arches was not going to work for this little cramped small bit. So I did what I should have done for the other two arches and copied parts just above it and just adjusted those into an arch shape. Of course, there was still the fear that the unions weren't going to work, and at the time of making this video, the solid modeling system is having some serious problems, but I hope by the time you watch this, that is no longer the case. But assuming that solid modeling works at the time you're watching this, what I'm basically doing is making up for the fact that Roblox Studio doesn't have a wireframe view, unless there's a plugin for that. So I'm just using different colored transparent parts to tell which bits intersect. And I'll have to do this for the other two curved arches, and that is just to get rid of the part that's clipping with the inside of the bridge wall. And here you can see a classic example of texture fighting, or also known as Z fighting. Changing your brick colors is useful for more than just stylizing your models. Now done with the pillars finally, and going back into player testing. And because I was experiencing a lot of lag, I closed out and came back in, and when I reloaded the file, none of the unions were showing up, and they were just invisible. When I tried to duplicate them, they would disappear, and there were just some really weird glitches, like when I deleted the part, the collision was still there. As you could see my character jumping up and hitting the collision. Let me know in the comments if anyone else is having a problem with unions, if you see this anywhere close to when I publish it, and I really hope this problem gets fixed. Solid modeling is a huge part of what I do. In fact, my cousin and I were one of the ones requesting solid modeling when it got put in, so we were really glad to have this feature. I mainly wanted it for bullet holes and doors, but it was clear it was good for way more than that. Now, I was hoping that publishing it to a game might do something, which I don't know why I keep doing that, because it never fixes problems. I guess I started at a time where playtesting was seriously glitched, and I had to publish everything to test it, which was a huge problem back then. And I don't mean when I started developing on Roblox, I mean when I started playtesting by publishing it. Don't get me wrong, Roblox Studio has come a long way since 2013. In fact, I think I still have a copy of the 2013 studio on my computer somewhere. So I had to delete everything I turned into unions and make it from scratch, and here I was trying to use triangles, which I was not in the mood to do all the trigonometry to figure that out, and that just wasn't going to work. And since unions was out of the question at this point, I discovered I just had to use some straight pieces, which actually worked out just fine. Especially since it actually made the texture look straighter and better as it curved with the curvature of the wall too. And here you see me coloring all the pieces differently. I like to do that for contrast, to check for texture fighting, and just generally to see where each of the pieces fills in. I always like to find multiple ways to do the same task, because I know one's either going to produce a better result or just be easier to accomplish. And I said I was done with the pillars, but apparently not. Arches, I mean, most of my work on the arches was free-handed, which, if you know me, you know I prefer to mass produce everything. If I'm freehanding, I prefer to be sculpting in Blender or ZBrush, which I actually don't have. Fun fact, the solid tools are actually the same thing as the Boolean tools in Blender, except those ones have a few more functions. So if you get used to them in Roblox Studio, you can go straight into Blender and know exactly what to do. Anyway, I'll probably end up making a video showing comparison between the solid modeling in Roblox Studio and the Boolean tools in Blender. So there's a reason to subscribe. Now just copying parts of the bridge and extending it before I create the big scene. This part gets really fun for me. It's just a matter of grouping everything properly so it's ready to be copied and moved. I love just making architectural sets or other kinds of sets where I can just then use them to construct larger pictures very quickly when everything is all uniform and pretty much the same, kind of like that one Roman temple thing I made, the bathhouse. I don't know if I still have that uploaded somewhere. So here I thought I'd make it just a little more interesting by raising the extended part of the bridge and adding some transitional steps. Elements like this are really fun and easy to slip in, you just have to think of it. Time to start adding hills of snow, a frozen lake, and probably some cliff faces around just to keep everything contained. Adding a flexible sphere mesh to this so that can be our snowy hills. They look like big piles of dough, pizza dough. Maybe I'm getting hungry. And a big sheet of ice to go under everything. At this point I'm just collecting elements, making sure everything fits in the color scheme, which the bridge kind of doesn't really fit, but that's alright for it to stand out because it's pretty much the focal element here. So I won't be modifying its color. And I'm going to try to keep this terrain really simple because this was mostly about the bridge. I love adding terrain this way, it's just really fast and easy, and it doesn't look as good as what I could make with just a low poly mesh in Blender. I could be using a low poly plugin for terrain, but I haven't had a chance to install any plugins at this point because I just barely installed Studio. But yeah, just little environments like this are something I enjoy doing. I wanted to keep this really simple, and this arch I made was a little bit of a stretch, but I thought it needed at least a few unique elements. And I would call this a low poly style, but it's more of a blocky style. Not like Minecraft, just like blocks smashed together in random sizes and shapes and rotations, which perfectly suits Roblox. Like I said, the goal here isn't to make a super detailed terrain, it's just basically to fill in the space around the scene with the figure I'm going to pose at the end. I didn't want to spend a ton of time on the boundaries of the map where the ends of the bridge are, so I just kind of let it clip with the rock because I wasn't going to include that in frame when I get my final image capture. Just filling in everything with marshmallows. And remember, after the day is over, I'm not allowed to touch this stuff anymore. Once it's done, it's done. Now once I kind of map out where the terrain is going to sit, I'm pulling the pillars down to fall to the bottom of wherever the bridge is being supported from. Don't want to have floating pillars, kind of like the College of Winterhold in Skyrim, which I think is kind of cool. And I was trying to decide whether this is a frozen river or a frozen lake. I decided just to make it a lake, just keep it simple, but I moved these rocks so they would stretch a little farther, just to be a little more interesting, especially since that was going to be the backdrop of the scene for my character posing and final image capture. And here you see me wasting a whole lot of time trying to duplicate something that I was able to do in the past, and that is to sort of be able to copy my character's limb pieces in the pose or animation when I paused it, but I couldn't figure it out, so I just kind of abandoned that idea and just decided to go to organic posing. And you might notice that when I put my character up against the ledge, his feet is not actually touching the ground, but this doesn't matter because I wasn't going to show the feet in the shot, so I decided just to leave it the way it was and not stress. So I wanted to give him a sort of leisurely, leaning up against the ledge kind of pose, relaxed, just looking at the lake, you know. It seems like something I find myself doing. I know how to rig characters in Blender, but for some reason I haven't ever tried to figure it out in Roblox Studio, which I think you can. It would make posing a lot easier. And whenever I'm posing Roblox avatars that come with pets, I like to do something creative. Let the animal or whatever creature interact with the environment a little bit. Just adds a little more, makes the scene a little more lively, I think. I did notice that the bridge kind of looked a little empty and just the surrounding scene. So I started making this wrought iron bench thing. I thought it was a good idea at first, but then you get into making really high detailed models in a big environment that you already spent time on, and I think that's just really a waste of time. That definitely counts as going on a tangent, and this is one of the situations when you should really just use either models you've prepared beforehand or things from the toolbox. In the 3D industry, this is getting models off of sites like BlendSwap or Sketchfab, and it's actually a really common practice to use other people's models or just models that you've stocked up so that you don't have to spend a lot of time creating a scene just making the random little objects all around. I've made dozens of wrought iron benches just like this, but a lot of my files got deleted when my last computer crashed. So I'm sort of having to start from scratch besides what I still have uploaded. But I decided for now to just pull a bench out of the toolbox. That was the most efficient thing to do, and there's no shame in that. I used to be seriously against using anything from the toolbox because it's not original, but to be honest, most popular games use plenty of models from the toolbox, and it's just normal. If you do want to make all custom assets, that's great. Especially if you're doing a very particular style, you need to do that. But for just general purpose games or scenes, it can save a lot of time just to use generic models that are available to you. I thought this dead tree model looked really nice in the scene, just some perfect branches if I just clip it through the floor. And my justification in using these is, these are assets I could make myself. I could go right into Blender and just make me up some branches. To be honest, it'd probably look better if I made everything myself, but this is definitely satisfactory and it saves a lot of time. For any maps or models I sell though, I will not use any other people's assets. I'll create everything myself unless they are assets they've given me specifically for that project. Now at this point, things went a little less productive. I was adding in some camera effects to get a nice picture, but for some reason the bloom wasn't really working and some of the other effects just weren't showing up. I even play tested it, I ran it and played it with character, and yeah, the effects weren't working. I made sure it was on the right lighting setting and everything. So I kind of wasted a lot of time doing that, but hopefully it'll start working again. I mean, those are really fun to add color and texture to your scene. Fortunately, I have a lot of post-processing stuff I can do in like GIMP and stuff. At least I was able to customize the lighting. I could take this whole scene into Blender and do a render there. I just have to retexture everything. It's nice to kind of have an overall color scheme of what you're doing. Things will have relative color and they'll kind of appear to be different colors, but the way you color each object still relates to the entire scheme as a whole. Meaning a red in a winter scene, which kind of has a blue tint, will look different than a red in a summer scene, which has more of a yellow tint. Now, the reason I didn't add a lot of decoration to the entire environment was because I'm just making this for the scene and the whole project was just running a bit long. I wanted to just complete it. If I was making this for a game, I would add a lot of detail all over the place, add a lot of extra models and things for the player, things to reward the player for exploring. Now in this case, it's basically just for eye candy. Something nice you can see in the scene, and it doesn't have to fit perfectly. It can clip a little bit, just as long as the camera view doesn't notice. However, I would recommend never doing that for a game. Now what I'm doing is just a simple print screen, paste in an image editor, and then I went into player playtesting, trying to see if I could notice any difference with the camera effects, and for some reason I had a hard time getting back up onto that bridge. I have a lot of fun testing with the player, just messing around with the physics, but right now I was just super tired, not really in the mood for this. And of course, there was no difference in the image quality. Now, I want you to ignore that advice because hopefully you won't be having these kind of weird glitches, and your camera effects will work just fine. And now just some quick editing in GIMP. GIMP is a free program that anybody can use. This was just a really quick edit, just tweaking some colors, adding a few filters on different layers, and then masking those layers to create the illusion of focus. As you may already be able to tell, I use a wide variety of programs in my work. While I'll be mostly focusing on Roblox Studio on this channel, I'm certainly open to covering other topics. Just comment down below and let me know your interests. And here are the final images. If you liked this video, give it a thumbs up so other people can see it. And if you want to see the tutorials I'll start posting, then go ahead and subscribe and hit the notification button so you know when I post. I'm a no fluff kind of guy, so you don't need to worry about me spamming your notifications. Let's build a better world. MrCamsaki signing out. Pizza dough.